Hello and welcome to another anime lore and theory video. I'm Shergok, your host, and today we are going to take a closer look at the worst Isekai worlds to be reborn in. And the first world on my list will probably sound very familiar, because it is practically our very own, the world of Tanya the Evil. This world is actually a little better than ours in many respects. It's just a terrible time to be living in Central Europe, especially in the German Empire. We already saw in the beginning of the anime how tight the supply lines were and how hard the work was. Tanya was explicitly sent to this very world to be broken, which means being X chose this exact moment in time to teach Tanya a lesson in hardship. And you could go even so far to say that this world is a test. Tanya has to live in it and die of a peaceful and natural death to prove herself. Because this ruthless manager had a slight disagreement with being X. Specifically, she denied the existence and the need for a higher power. And now she has to prove herself that this is actually true, that no power is needed in her life other than her own. And she can turn away from atheism at any time and beg for forgiveness. Or she has to survive in this harsh and cruel world and die of a natural death to avoid going to hell. In other words, the world has reached a point where Tanya must survive for a good century in what is likely the worst version of it. And thanks to her complete lack of scruples, she has managed to do very well so far. But there's one other thing that I want to talk about, one other thing that makes this world, even at its worst, still a bit better than ours. Because in this world there is magic, magical units and magical combat, though not on the same scale as an Overlord. And this could actually be a pretty big advantage for humanity in general. However, and here we return to the premise of the story, Tanya's task is to survive and die of a natural death. And I don't think the fighting and dying will end after 3 or 4 years of warfare. As I said, the entire premise is that it's going to be damn hard to live a peaceful life in this war-torn world, and then die peacefully at the age of 80 or 90, surrounded by your family. This means the world likely won't calm down after just a few years of war, and Tanya's first attempt to get away from the front lines already failed, thanks to a power-up of all things. The magic factor also makes everything extremely unpredictable, because we don't know what potential still lies dormant within it. Only that this type of magic makes the First World War even more relentless. And the term First World War isn't just used by accident by me here. In other words, Tanya will be forced to either to overcome her own ego, which won't happen, or to overcome even worse circumstances than she's already facing. For everyone else, of course, this means things will get a lot worse, not better, if my prediction holds up. Because if it's going to be difficult for Tanya, a being with unimaginable magical power, enough to scare an undead overlord, to survive in this world, then for any normal person who lands here without Tanya's magical power-ups, her ego, her competence, or her ruthlessness, and who isn't creative enough to find very unique interpretations of the laws of war, their life will be very short indeed, and they most likely won't die of a natural death. Not to mention what happens if Tanya actually wins the war, if she climbs the ladder. I mean, the entire reason why she was even reincarnated into the magical version of the German Empire was that she was so ruthless and merciless when firing an employee, that he simply pushed her in front of the next train to get revenge, while she was still a dude. I know it's anime, it's weird. In other words, a world where Tanya has any form of social power will remain a brutal struggle for survival for everyone else, especially since Tanya will do everything she can to create a good and secure life for herself first and foremost, no matter the cost. On the other hand, Tanya's modern knowledge combined with magic could make this world much better. And at least in this world, there is a merciful God who gives Tanya a second chance and a way out of her misery at any time she wish. The next world isn't so forgiving. It's Konosuba's world. And I've already talked a lot about this world in previous videos and made an entire one about why it isn't as funny as you might think to actually land there, because even if Konosuba is more comedy than deconstruction of the classical isekai setting, the world is actually quite brutal and a relentless struggle for survival takes place day in and day out. And this is mentioned quite frequently, especially in the novels. Let's start with the very premise. While Tanya really only has to overcome her own ego in order to have a good life again, you're sent to the world of Konosuba to be burned up on the front lines. Basically imagine being just a common soldier in World War I, because this is ultimately what Konosuba's world boils down to. And while Kazuma has Aqua, a walking resurrection spell who can save him from many things that would otherwise have permanently offed him, like being decapitated, digested by Hans, or beaten to a pulp by a horde of kobolds, at least Kazuma has enough intelligence and luck and enough Aqua to eventually secure a good life for himself. The average isekai hero, whom Aqua sends to the very front lines by the hundreds, is not so lucky to just opt out of this adventurer lifestyle at any point he wants. First and foremost, Aqua is a con artist of a goddess, and she talks them into how pleasant and great life will be in this beautiful, wonderful new world, that it works according to video game logic, and that it is full of adventure and wonders. And all of this is true in a sense. What Aqua conveniently leaves out first and foremost that you can die by the reincarnation process itself, because the language of the world is basically turbo uploaded straight to your own brain, which not every brain can process well. And again, Aqua's just a female con man. The new world is not a nice place. The cheat item you get might be overpowered, but once it's gone, you're just one of many. Even the ability to create anything you can think of led to the creation of an apocalyptic spider robot in the end. The Destroyer, a thing that could eliminate everything in its path, and has done so for centuries. And the guy who built this very machine, someone Aqua once sent to this world, had no qualms or regret about finally leaving it. The normal isekai hero who gets a powerful weapon and levels up in Axel will eventually stand on the front lines and realize that all their power is useless when the enemy is literally a dark goddess who can bombard entire fortresses with explosion magic. Even a great sword is not so great against a nuke. Basically, imagine artillery fire in the First World War, and obviously you are going to have a bad time. Now imagine artillery fire in the First World War, with magic, and you have Tanya's alternate First World War world. Now imagine daily bombardment with nuclear-grade weapons, and you have the frontline of Konosuba's world, at the worst of it. And merciless offensive magic is just one of the strengths that the Demon King and his general possesses, the mere existence of that being alone, and spoiler alert, later his very own daughter, makes the monsters extremely strong. Toads that were once just toads can now swallow humans in a single gulp, and children regularly disappear in exactly this manner. And as Kazuma has said many times, there are no labor rights, no health insurance, or paid vacation in the new world. Whether you are a simple day laborer or a member of the Adventurer Guild, by our own modern standards, you are being exploited. And it's telling that many older adventurers voluntarily go into the forest to die peacefully by the hand or rather by the presence of a tranquility girl instead of ending up homeless and eventually just starving to death the unpleasant way. Tanya wouldn't be overpowered here either. Tanya would be one of many who get burnt up on the front lines, because Celestina, another general of the Demon King, has already told that the supply of new isekai heroes instantly dried up the moment Aqua was gone, and the angels that basically replaced her actually told the truth to everybody. And again, this alone tells you enough about this world. If even young Japanese guys decline to being reincarnated into this fantasy world. And monsters are just everywhere. But in addition, the kingdom of Berserk is also on the absolute frontline between humanity and a never-ending horde of demons. And unlike Tanya's world, Aqua is by no means a merciful goddess. The goddess of party tricks and deaths is an absolute scam artist. The reason she is so fanatically worshipped in the world of Konosuba is that she promises her own followers they will be reborn in a great new world without monsters, with a form of magic that makes life easy, a world of peace, fun, and progress. And that's exactly the world all the Isekai heroes come from, modern Japan. In other words, Aqua tells all the Isekai heroes that the new fantasy world is great, and she tells her followers, those who actually have to live in it, how great Japan is. And I will just say this, our world is not exactly developing in a peaceful direction. Drones make war even more relentless and merciless, the nuclear powers are becoming increasingly hostile to each other again, several parts of the world are still suffering from hunger, and the youth of many nations are for the first time in centuries significantly poorer and worse off than the baby boomer generation before them. The fact that there's a growing group of young people in China and the United States who have completely given up, and that Japan is also suffering from rapid deteriorating standards of living does not inspire much hope for the future. Many people under 40, at least in the Western world, have actually come to terms with the fact that they will get poorer and that the world will get worse, and that's just how it works. Again, not all people, not the majority, but a solid chunk of it. In the worst case scenario, you are getting scanned by Aqua, get reborn into the new Isekai world, become a great hero until you just burned up on the front lines and die, only to be reborn by Aqua into Japan and start the cycle all over again. And again it is telling that this new world is so bad that without Aqua's scam artist skills, not a single Japanese person would come to the new world anymore. And Kazuma originally wanted to leave after he died the first time anyway, which again proves my point. And finally, there's the world of Overlord. While in Tanya's world humanity only has to fear itself and what it has created, and in Konosuba's world it is at least possible to eliminate the Demon King and thus eliminate the greatest threat to humanity and the monsters that are so much stronger because of him. The new world of Overlord is so anti-human that humanity would have already become extinct without the help of these 6 players. These 6 people who were brought into this new world at first 600 years before the actual start of the story, with a significant chunk of power because they came as their in-game avatars. And only this allowed them to save humanity. Not to rule the world, just to save humanity, to keep it going. And maybe it died anyway, because the humans in the new world differ in their biology significantly from us normal humans, from small physical things to their teeth. And if the bones of these humans were to appear in our world, people would discuss whether there was a second intelligent human species that had already gone extinct. But this could also be just a consequence of magic and mana, so I will just assume that humanity in the new world is our own humanity. But again, even assuming that humanity still exists as humanity, that this is us, it still would have already been wiped out without the Isekai heroes. And it was only the conquest of the nameless continent by the 8 kings of avarice and an apocalyptic war against the dragons that allowed humanity to spread, to grow and flourish for a brief period of time, simply because many of humanity's predators were eliminated or at least decimated. But these kings destroyed themselves in a civil war 500 years ago. The theocracy, the state where the 6 players who supposedly saved humanity are worshipped as gods by now, is now the only thing that have prevented humanity from being wiped out and eaten by its predators for 500 years after the collapse of the 8 kings. Nevertheless, shortly before the arrival of Einsulgon, demi-humans, the beastmen of the Beastman nation, invaded the Dragon Kingdom, which is ruled by a monarch with dragon blood but is otherwise completely human, and these beastmen just devour us alive. They feast. And children in their mother's wombs, for example, were considered a delicacy by them. They see us as prey, and without the help of the theocracy, They are winning and they are currently eating alive an entire kingdom. But even far away and far removed from the front lines, on rich fertile soil, behind high mountain chains, life isn't easy. And the life of the people in the countryside is hard and exploitative in the kingdom of Riestais. Hunger, disease, crime and violence, especially by their superiors, define their everyday life. This is the life of the man of the kingdom, at least until Ein Sulgon showed up. But he didn't save them. He eliminated the entire kingdom outright. This undead overlord of Nezarec, this equivalent of Kazuma and Tanya, had his undead troops not only wipe out an entire kingdom to the last man, except for a few allies, but many of them were resurrected as mere zombies, thanks to the Squire zombies and the Death Knight that have created them. And speaking of which, the Sorcerer Kingdom that Ainz established did not unleash its armies because Ainz dislikes the kingdom or considered the attack on his own grain shipment to the Holy Kingdom so serious, so egregious as to eliminate an entire country. Rather, his advisors, Demiurge and Albedo, both evil to the core, concluded that they had to show the world what happens to Nezarec's enemies. They needed a deterrent, something to show people what happens when you mess with Ainz. Especially after they had treated the Empire, the Dwarven Kingdom, and the Holy Kingdom very well. And now they had to show everyone what happens if you don't submit, or even rebel, and attack, and fight back. And the next war against the theocracy of Slain, the state that was the shield and sword of humanity for over half a millennia, is already on the horizon, and troops have already been mobilized. And while the life in the Sorcerer Kingdom is good for now, it could change at a whim. Ein Sulgon is basically the only one from keeping the rest of his great tomb to mistreat humanity. And even if you're reborn with incredible powers, it's also not guaranteed that a person reborn in this new world will have a pleasant life. The Minotaur King was apparently a human who arrived in the new world in his Minotaur avatar. However, he introduced things like surgery in his own kingdom. Mind you, in a world where there are healing spells, meaning he likely did not have access to them, meaning not only have you lost your human body, and likely also part of your human mind, but you don't even have access to healing magic, meaning every cut, every sickness will hit you just as hard as it would have any other being in this new world. In addition to all of this, two players arrived 200 years ago, and one of them eliminated the other. So again, humanity is still a threat to itself. And the one who actually eliminated this other human player became eventually the strongest member of the 13 Heroes. A group who desperately fought for the mere survival of humanity and indeed the entirety of the new world against a demon emperor. That's right, something that is the central conflict and the central antagonist in Konosuba is just one of the many stories of legendary monsters in Overlord. And this hero of humanity, this player, gave his life in this fight, and apparently he also denied his own resurrection. Which again is not a good sign, as we already have established. The world also appears to be completely godless, and after death, you end up in a river of souls, which is very reminiscent of Dungeons and Dragons. In other words, while there's at least a heaven in Tanya's and Kazuma's world, in Overlord, only hell is a certainty, the many chambers of Nezarec and their inhabitants, for example Neuronist and her tool, and yes, it is literally that what it is looking like, and yes, it is going in there. Kyohoko and his cockroach pit, parasites nesting in your body, and when you think you can't go on anymore, when the pain and the damage these parasites cause are just too great to continue, to finally embrace the mercy of death, you are being healed back to full health in order to experience everything again and again and again. And above it all, a seemingly cold Overlord reigns, who has already wiped out human life millions of times. He is at least merely indifferent, and sees humans as a means to an end, to bring fame and honor to himself and the name of his friends, to Einzulgon. And his kingdom is not a bad place to live for the normal human citizen. However, his two advisors, Demiurge and Albedo, as well as the many other members of the Grey Tomb, from Sheltier Bloodfallen to Lupus Regina and Naber al-Gamma, to the simple Elder Lich, most of Nezric wants to see humanity either suffer or die. And only Einzulgon, for now, holds them back, at least when it comes to their own citizens. Because, and this is just a rumor, you didn't hear it from me, I've heard that the Happy Farm isn't particularly happy. Worse still, there doesn't seem to be a way back to the old world either. And even if the theocracy knows it, our own world, our old world, in the year 2138 is an absolute catastrophe. The rain is oily, food only grows under a dome now, and the atmosphere is so toxic that even with a gas mask on all the time, you probably need a new pair of lungs by your mid-30s. Work is long, hard, and exhausting, and our own once blue planet has generally become so inhospitable that the comparison with a hive world from Warhammer 40k is just all too fitting. Despite all of its dangers, despite all of humanity's predators, despite Einzulgon and his undead army, and despite the fact that in 100 years more players could arrive and unleash another devastating war, this fundamentally anti-human world that we are now seeing in Overlord is still better, still a greater choice to our own toxic wasteland on Earth in the year 2138. And that's why the number one spot of the worst Isekai world goes to Overlord. And with that said, now it's your turn. What's your opinion on the topic and on the video? Let me know it down in the comment. And while you type, I say thank you very much for watching and have a nice day. Order Daddy Order, ASK, Bad Girl Yi, Bad Burrito 316, Beezer, Ben C, Brandon S, Brandon D, Chrissy, Crowley 0221, Sia, Crystal Prime, Dead Slime, Death is Mercy, Deathless Dragonlord, Demon Xenomorph 1987, Devin Downen, Ding Dong, Din Pep, Dragonlord Placido Saxophone, Duckwagon, Dunkler Krieger, Dystopia, Dystopia II, Enigmatic Unicorn, Feralchivan, Guy with That Head, Hector Marino, Hoss, Huster, Jacob G, Jana B, Jason, J. Morris, Chromius, Kyle R, Lee K. Long, Legendarius, Le Louche Britannia with a Mustache, Lexus Fox, Lord Nishikian Rai, Lord Touch Me, Lofrazer, Merowek, Mr. Shoes, Mr. Tweaker, Michael R, Michael Y, Nope, Oh Hell No, Normal Toad, Oh Kill, Overlord General Gasper, Paddy Pentum, Personage, Ruru, Primus 11, Rhinomere, Q&A Caracos P, Shergox's Daddy, Shadow Lightning Wolf, Shrine Keeper, Sir Axolotl, Super Tier Magic Batista Bomb, Supreme Cheese, Staris, Ted, Texas Deer, The Orc War Boss, Rocket Smasher, T.E. Wang, Vash Hawkeye, Vegito27, Venture Fanatic, Wilhelm, Xenokai, and Sonagon. Thanks guys. Anyway, have a nice day, and I hope to see you all again soon on my next video.